Hey everybody, this is Pete Bartolozzi, welcoming you to another class session. And we're continuing with Understanding Ages and Dispensations. As a quick recap, the first dispensation from creation to the fall was the Age of Innocence. And then, of course, that innocence was lost at the fall. And that began the second dispensation, which is technically the first dispensation of God's dealings with man, with fallen man, excuse me. And so the second dispensation was the age of conscience, where parents were to train them with a trained moral conscience, raise them in the way they should go, so when they're older not depart, and so on. But anyway, from children to children, and so on, family to family, generation to generation. But this failed because of the sin in man, and there's a lot of satanic outside forces with the Nephilim and other things, as they introduced a lot of wrong things. But then that ended at the flood. And so it was from the fall to the flood was the age of conscience. And we've now been in the third dispensation, which is the age of civil government, where God established civil government after the fall. Or excuse me, after the flood. Let me keep my words right here so I don't confuse anybody. We talked a little bit about God establishing civil government. We corrected some error on that issue. We talked about rights, and that was an important thing to understand. There's a difference between the ability to choose something and the right to choose something. The Bible separates the difference. In our culture, they haven't separated the difference, so it has kept people confused to where even people in the church, Christians, have not understood the difference, that it is not a right to choose what is wrong. They have ability to choose what is wrong because God gave us a free choice. But it's only right to choose something if it is righteous, because right is the root word of righteous. And then we talked about, without going in further into that, it's an important thing to know and understand, that a concept that a lot of Christians have not seemed to understood. And then, of course, the other concept that has been missed in the church is the concept of love versus fear. This is the primary first ruling concept, if you would, is the nature, the contrast of natures between the nature of God, agape love, and the nature of fear, which is Satan's nature. And then secondary is the concept that comes underneath the ruling concept of love versus fear, is the concept of love versus hate. Love in that case would be phileo, what you're fond of, what you believe in, and then of course what you hate. And so, but we've been taught as though that's the only concept, it's the ruling concept, and that's the only way. But see, in the understanding the love versus fear being the major concept, love versus hate, depending upon which nature you're operating on, the love of God, his nature, then love versus hate is in its proper perspective. But under the nature of fear, it is perverted, it's twisted, it's turned around to where they actually think we have a horrible hate, and they also think that's the primary ruling concept when it's not, and they don't understand that they've got that concept backward, but they genuinely believe they're accurate, they genuinely believe they're right, and Satan is using this, of course, to get people to reject the gospel. This is why we must pray that Satan, who blinds their minds, that we bind him from blinding their minds as we share the gospel, and then a person is left only. Then the only thing Satan's left with is hoping that his deception in their mind keeps them upon their own choice, without his influence, to choose to reject, without his direct influence anyway, to choose to reject the gospel. But when the blinders are taken off, I believe there'll be billions of people coming in this final revival into the kingdom of God. And I'm not going to get on that any longer, but we got to understand that concept, because love does hate what is wrong. But the problem is under fear, hey, their concept is reversed. So they love immorality and hate those who stand for morality. And that's enough of that, because I've talked about that twice in this. So what I want to bring out an interesting fact as we go on with civil government. And that's Genesis chapter 10, verse 25, where it says, "And unto Eber were born 2 sons. The name of one was Peleg, for in his days the earth was divided, and his brother was Joktan." Now, scientists say that all the continents were once one landmass. This verse tells us that that's true. Evolutionists say that it took millions of years for that to happen, but this is a lie. It happened in the days of Peleg. Peleg means earthquake. I'm not saying that it was completely divided as it is today, as the continental plates have been shifting ever since, but it seems a good portion of it took place at this time in the days of Peleg, and why he named his son that, because the earth was divided. The metallic hydrogen oxygen layer above the earth, the waters above the firmament, as we saw in creation, created a high pressure here that were that that we were obviously originally created to live in. It was gone after the flood, and it allowed the earth to expand some, creating the dividing of the earth's crust into what we call continental plates. Of course, there could be truth to the fact also that this might have begun some before the canopy came down, before the flood, because when sin entered into man in his body, then that sin, since his body was out of the dust of the ground, it says that it went into the earth. So it began to cause a decay of the earth, and might have been starting to create that expansion, that decay in the earth, to where the desire to expand the earth might have put pressure against that metallic canopy, which began to break it up and to break up and mess with the Earth's magnetic field as well, which suspended it, which we'll look at here a little bit later. Let me go on. But that could have been what caused the breakup of that in the flood as well. But all of this took place right about the flood, after the flood, when the metallic canopy collapsed. It is estimated that the earth is about 10% larger than God originally created it. Because of this canopy coming down, the earth's crust breaking up and shifting, it kind of expanded it a little bit. And the earth has been in decay since the fall, and that's what I want to bring out. These separations are because of the decay. Death, which decay is death at work. It began with the breaking up of the layer of the earth that was broken up at the time of the flood, because it talks about the depths were broken up, not just the rain that came down. I mentioned before about as I just mentioned just now too, but it mentioned before in other sessions about the firmament being metallic. But I never gave the biblical or scientific evidence, as I should have during the time of covering the flood. So I'm going to take a step back and cover that, and then continue on with this age of civil government. So now, the Hebrew, I could bring out that the Hebrew word for firmament is rakia, and it does mean a word that means to compress, to put under pressure, to stretch out the arch of heaven, as some have even brought out it means. But there's one thing about this word, it means something, it has to do with metallic, being spread out. But the idea of metallic is in this word rakia. And so we have that information. But as far as the science is concerned, I'm not a scientist. I'll be the first to admit that. So I'm going to draw from somebody who is a scientist, and I'm going to draw from Dr. Carl Baugh, who has a series of videos, and you can find these on YouTube, that are entitled Creation in Symphony. And there's several of them, so I'm only going to just share with you a small portion of what was in those videos, specifically about this firmament above the atmosphere that we talked about before when we looked at creation. So I transcribed this portion from one of his videos, and so I'm giving credit to whom credit is due. And I'll let you know when I'm done with it. And sometimes I'll add a little comment in between all this, but at the end, I'll let you know when I'm done with what I transcribed from his video, so you know what came from him, and then where I begin with teaching the Word of God again. So, beginning with his transcription here, it says, this firmament was a bubble of water that is above the atmosphere of the earth. Now, the word for that firmament is rakia in the Hebrew. It's a very special word. This Hebrew word for firmament means to compress, pound together, and stretch out this arch of heaven in thin metallic sheets. Metallic sheets? That threw theologians and creation scientists worldwide. However, researcher Dan Cook spent over 20 years in major laboratories preoccupied with the question about the world before Noah's flood. And he said, after years and decades of research, I know what metal was in the firmament. He was asked, was there real metal that in the firmament? And he said, that's what the Hebrew word means. One scholar said, I understand that, but I've taken it to be figurative. He said, it won't work figuratively. Unless it's literal, you can't keep it in suspension. He was told, you have a problem, because on day number 4, which is where the sun, moon, and stars were made to shine light upon the earth, if you have a metallic vault, you're not going to be able to see the sunlight or the starlight or the light of the moon reflected and coming in. He said, don't you know that most metals in their purest state are transparent? Don't you remember that when the astronauts walked on the surface of the moon, that the visors of their helmets actually contained a thin coating of pure gold, and it was transparent? They could look out of the surface of the moon and actually see all the details in vivid relief. He went on to say, I know what metal was in the firmament. At Lawrence Livermore National Laboratories, they had done some experiments with the elements of water. They took the elements of water inadvertently, they compressed them. Remember, the Hebrew word rakia means to compress and pound together. And then they added energy. The water molecules of oxygen simply turned blue. But when they got to the hydrogen, they found a very special thing occurred. The hydrogen, when compressed with energy, added under super cold cryogenic circumstances, the hydrogen bonded into a unique crystalline lattice. Other laboratories followed suit and found the same results. It was first transparent and then later became opaque. At the microscopic level, 1/1,000,000th of a square inch, in the structure of the lattice, the hydrogen was dark and took a metallic form. In between the metallic context, there were lighter areas of hydrogen in crystalline form, metallic but transparent. The transparent areas were not superconductive, but the darker areas were actually superconductive. We're not talking about a wide band, probably at most only a few inches thick. That's all that was necessary, as the superconductivity is a very, and superconductivity is a very special phenomenon. When the hydrogen became opaque, you could not see through it, but it only became opaque in the veins or structural supports. The metallic crystalline areas in between allowed the light to shine in because it was in transparent form and made up a vast majority of the metallic hydrogen structure. But the superconductive areas make it very interesting. The Earth is like a big magnet with its electromagnetic field. I saw pictures from NASA of an experiment where the magnet would suspend something that is superconductive. It would suspend it above and would also suspend it below. That means that the thin layer of bonded metallic hydrogen, superconductive in veins, would actually hold its metallic layer in suspension above the Earth, that is, around the atmosphere. This is the next thought I want to bring out that he brought out concerning this metallic structure. He said, there is a gentle glow that hydrogen bears when it is energized. The gentle glow is pink, specifically 63 to 65 angstrom magenta. Even though the oxygen is blue, the hydrogen overpowers the blue, and thus you get a pink color. In other words, there was a gentle pinkish glow in the atmosphere during the pre-flood era before we lost this canopy over the earth. Research has shown that when you look through pink or at pink, and it has to be the right level of pink, again, 63 to 65 angstrom magenta, your brain generates norepinephrine. And norepinephrine is a neurotransmitter. Dr. Ball stated that a number of people working at his museum have used pink glasses and have had their dyslexia altered to some degree because of the neurotransmission problem, which means it's altered for the better, of course. He had a psychiatrist call and say that her associate had an attention deficit syndrome problem and had to be on heavy medication. After seeing one of Dr. Ball's lectures about the pink glasses, he ordered a pair, and after just a couple of days of wearing them, he threw away his medication. He gives this disclaimer: even though we are not medical doctors and not recommending people throw away their medication when using these glasses, but it is interesting to note that a number of people simply looking through pink have had a marvelous transformation to some degree or another in their impairment. When looking through these glasses, the world does not look pink. In fact, the blue lines strike in front of the retina, but the red lines strike directly on the retina, and actual colors are enhanced. Looking through these pink glasses, the world is a more vivid, brighter place to live. Research found that not only did the hydrogen, this is the next thought I wanted to emphasize, the next thought he wanted to bring out about this metallic hydrogen, this firmament, this rakia that we've been talking about. He said research has found that not only did hydrogen in its transparent form transmit all the spectrum of light so that you got all the intense colors coming right through, but it also filtered out the shortwave radiation, and it became fiber optic and transferred the energy of the light throughout the firmament. What this means is that the sunlight of the day on the day side of the earth actually had its light transferred diminishingly to the night side of the earth, which means that the greater light ruled the day and the lesser light ruled the night. It would certainly have involved the moon, but the moon is not out every night, nor is the moon always full. But it seems it involved more than just the moon, but it involved the transfer of energy from the day side to the night side through this fiber optic firmament of the canopy of hydrogen. That means that in all probability, before the flood, there was no midnight darkness. That meant that dusk that we have now is what was the darkest it got all night long. That means that the stars would be seen in more vivid detail because the red filter was built in so that the full color of the stars would be seen. Now, one more thing I want to address concerning this canopy, and he brings out here. He said, however, there is a problem with the magnetic decay, because we know there's an exponential magnetic decay that we, as far back as we can remember, as we can discover, has been in the earth. There's a problem with the magnetic decay as far as creation is concerned. If the Earth's magnetic field began with an exponential decay, that means that the Creator would have had to write it into the formula. A decay in a very short period of time would disrupt the optimal expression of life forms that He created. Scholars have found that living systems depend on the strength of the magnetic field. In fact, it is so low in intensity at this point that effective cellular communication is disrupted and is insufficient. And since all life forms, including man, depend upon that magnetic field for life processes, and that eventually all life would cease to be without it, decay is simply a slow form of death. So if the decay was programmed in by the Creator, then this would be equivalent to saying that God programmed death into His creation. Since God is the author of life, not death, this would show a flaw in His creation and speak contrary to who He is, to who He says He is. However, in day number 2, as the firmament was created, the metallic hydrogen layer above the firmament began to assimilate the shortwave energy from space, the light that would come, and it would assimilate this into the firmament itself and subsequently share the energy with the Earth's magnetic field on which the firmament rode, suspended with superconductive levitation. That means that the Earth's magnetic field was constantly re-energized as we living systems used that energy. Thus, the creation model shows that all the stellar bodies, the stars, the sun, the moon, the reflection from other planets, constellations, and galaxies at a great distance, all actually intervene and contribute for the life of man. The canopy assimilated the light, the shortwave radiation, filtered out the shortwave radiation so that we would not decay from ultraviolet radiation. It kept that charge intact, but at the time of the flood, this canopy liquefied and came down as rain, causing a disruption or decay of the magnetic field. This reveals that God in the beginning created the earth to regenerate its energy without decay, that is, without death, since God is not the author of death. Now, this brings me to what I transcribed from his video. And again, I reiterate that I recommend watching his videos. You can find them on YouTube, entitled Creation in Symphony. And there's a series of them, I forget how many. But he's got a bunch of other videos on there that are very good too, if you want to see those. Now, coming back now to where we were at in the age of civil government. So let's go back to this dispensation we're talking about, this third dispensation, the age of civil government. So as we come to the next thought, we first need to understand that Satan does nothing original of himself. Everything he does is to counterfeit God. My biblical evidence comes from the time of his fall, recorded in Isaiah chapter 14, verses 12 through 14. It says, "How are you fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How are you cut down to the ground, who did weaken the nations? For you said in your heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High God." The conclusion of his rebellion reveals the drive of his rebellion, where his desire is to be like the Most High God. His drive has not changed from that day till this. So again, Satan does nothing original of himself. His drive is all encompassed in "I will be like the Most High God." So everything he does is to counterfeit God. With that biblical truth, we can now further understand what takes place next. As we read now in Genesis chapter 10, and we'll read first of all, read these verses in chapter 10, verses 8 through the first part of verse 10. And it says, "And Cush begat Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one in the earth." Actually, I believe this is incorrect. This is not Genesis 10. This is Genesis 9. In fact, I hate doing that in the middle of a video, but I'm just going to sit here and go and double check that. So I got my Bible right here, even though I put the verses up on my notes. Chapter, this is 8 through 10, or 9, 8 through 10. Okay, I take that back. It is chapter 10. Forgive me. But I wanted to correct it before going on, so I didn't. If I had the wrong reference, it wouldn't cause any problems. But anyway, 10 verse 8, it says, "And Cush begat Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one in the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Wherefore it is said, even as Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord, and the beginning of his kingdom was Babel." I would like to read this commentary in the stone edition of the Chumash. Now, the scroll version of the first 5 books of the Bible is called the Torah. The modern print version of the Torah is called the Chumash. That's what I'm reading from, which comes from the Hebrew word kamesh, meaning 5, for the first 5 books of the Bible. And this is the footnote. It says, before Nimrod, there were neither wars nor reigning monarchs. He subjugated the Babylonians until they crowned him, after which he went to Assyria and built great cities. The Torah calls him a mighty hunter, which Most commentators interpret figuratively. Nimrod ensnared men with his words and incited them to rebel against God. He was the forerunner of the hypocrite who drapes himself in robes of piety in order to deceive the masses. His first conquest, which laid the basis for his subsequent empire building, was Babel. Now, notice it says his first conquest was Babel, which became the center of Nebuchadnezzar's Babylonian empire. The phrase, before the Lord, does not mean that God inspired him to do what he did, as I've heard some imply. You can be before somebody in both opposition as well as correspondence. In this case, Nimrod was in opposition to God. Nimrod was incited by Satan. Since God established civil government, God obviously calls and anoints people to be in government positions. Satan counterfeits this by raising up those he wants in government, or even, if he can, influence someone God called and anointed, and then if this person will yield to him, he can pervert what God gave him into something obviously God never intended, which has happened as well. Now, let's go now to this kind of sets the stage, understanding Nimrod, because he was the author of the Tower of Babel. So we get to Genesis chapter 11, the first 9 verses. It says, "And the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. And it came to pass, as they journeyed from the east, that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and dwelt there. And they said to one another, Go to, let us make brick, and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone, and slime had they for mortar. And they said, Go to, let us build a city and a tower, whose top may reach into heaven. And let us make us a name, lest we be scattered upon the face of the whole earth. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of men had built. And the Lord said, Behold, the people is one, and they all have one language. And they began to do, and now nothing would be restrained from them which they have imagined to do. Go to, let us go down, and there confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad the face of the whole earth, and left off building the city. Therefore the name of the place is called Babel." Well, with that, we're getting here to the end of this class session, so we'll take up from here next time. But again, I'm thanking you for listening into this class session. I trust it's been a blessing to you. And until we meet next time, be blessed.